All right.
Good
evening, everyone.
It's Tony Christ here. Like to welcome you. This is our second week of our podcast at Odyssey. I'm with Ishmael Mani. It's in the evening on Sunday at 9:00. We hope to get around to doing these live regularly. Excuse me. Happy Halloween.
A very happy Halloween.
I got you'll see the little devil when she comes up. I got grandchildren are lovely little things, and you squeeze them and you hug them and everything, and then they get you sick. Well, I got COVID this week for the second time, and I got it from this little devil right here.
She is adorable. She's very adorable.
And all her only symptom sign was having snot come out of her nose. She got both of us. She got my wife Leanne, and she got me. But what can you say? It is Halloween, so Ishmael, why don't you just take our pictures down? We'll start and let them look at Halloween pictures for a minute before they see us. I want to take a minute. I'd like to thank you for listening to the podcast. I want to take a minute to talk about last week, the Federal Reserve. I want to try to clarify some things I said there. I want people to have a little bit better understanding of what's going on with the Federal Reserve. It might be helpful to consider it this way. If money has a value and the interest rate is the price of money, the interest rate would have to be positive for money to have a value. In other words, if the inflation rate was 2%, the interest rate would have to be higher than 2 for money to have a value. And I was talking about this with Ishmael before. We were in a warped kind of a place for 20 years now, close to 20 years, ever since the end of Alan Greenspan and the beginning of Ben Bernanke, and it went on through Miss Yellen and all the way up to the current guy until the inflation exploded. So we had about an 18-20-year warp where we were going by Mr. Bernanke's theory that he thought there was a problem that we never really had. We had a recession, a severe one in 08-09. But after that, he persisted with this notion that we were threatened by deflation. And it was that theoretic notion that caused him, I feel, to really unleash the destruction on our economy. And what I mean by that is, by holding the rates artificially low because of his fear of a deflation, other things happened. And one of the things was the US Congress, with rates real low, went on a spending spree and took the debt from 6 trillion to 33 trillion. And my God, what did they care? The interest rates, the average interest rate on our debt curve was 1.6%, 1.6% a year and a half, 2 years ago. And then a few months ago, it went up to 2.92. Surprise, surprise. And then we have 7.6 trillion to refinance this year. And guess what? Money has a value. We have an interest rate. Uh-oh. And for a generation of people, Ishmael's one of them, who's done very well in the economy, it's been in this environment without an interest rate. And I further said that fact of not having an interest rate, a positive interest rate, okay, I realized there was an interest rate, and we were averaging 2% inflation, and we were barely above 2% in the interest rate. And not having an interest rate or having a minimal interest rate favored very wealthy people and big businesses because they could borrow millions and millions of dollars and put it to some kind of work. And it discriminated against average earners that had to go out and work and didn't have investment capital, and they slowly got more behind. And we're going to talk about the same thing again from a different angle, from the angle of a family shortly. The other thing that's noteworthy about the Federal Reserve is you must try to remember there's nothing productive they do. They cannot create welfare and they cannot create wealth. They can create very short-term explosions in the number of dollars, or they, through manipulating the price of interest rates for a short term, they can create the illusion that money's almost free. But it's an illusion. And eventually it has to stand up to other currencies. It has to stand up to a finite amount of things it trades for. Like, for example, if you had a country and you doubled the money supply, guess what would happen? Well, the prices of the things the money traded for would eventually double.
And we
because
saw
that
it.
fiat is going to trade in that same proportion. Okay, so that's the basic problem of having a Fed that took the money supply and grew it at a greater amount than ever in the history of America for this century. In other words, they created the problem that now they're trying to cure. Okay. And part of the cure requires interest rates, but it's worse than that now because of the debt. And I'll say this too. I was tasked by a very old friend of mine from William and Mary, Scott Moyer. He said, Tony, we'll come up with a cure. And that's what gave me the idea to do this podcast. So in exploring these problematic areas and trying to present them in an unbiased manner, I mean, Ishmael and I are not in the Federal Reserve. We're not an advocate for the decision makers in our society right now. We could try to give a fair understanding of these problems to come up with a solution. That's actually my own goal, and it's consistent with what my old friend suggested I do. So we eventually want to work out a solution for the country. It's true that empires always decline, but we have information. People's knowledge and knowing and understanding what's going on is our hope to turn things around and save them. So basically, that's, I guess we'll leave it alone for now. It's going to come up again with the Federal Reserve. We're not through with them by any means. But please, please don't think that anything they do, they have basically two crude tools. They have the short-term interest rate, that you've seen what they've done with that. The other one is they have the ability, by buying government bonds and buying mortgages. And the flip side of that is they enter a credit in the Federal Reserve Bank. If they buy $1 billion of bonds, there's a $1 billion number appears in the bank. Well, that's how they create money. Okay. And then that money gets lent and relent. And we don't need to stay with this, but suffice it to say, money has always had an interest rate up until this century, when Mr. Bernanke started playing with that notion and convinced other Fed chairmen that they ought to continue doing it. And the sad thing to me is the U.S. Congress went on the biggest spending spree in the history of America during this time period, from $6 billion to $33 billion. And it's going to come to an abrupt halt. And the cost to carry that debt is going to go parabolic on us. So we're trying to point these items out because we're seeking solutions for them. You have to deal with them. Politicians don't talk about them because they're unelectable if they do. If they're honest enough to talk about it, they would rank the debt up number one, meaning there would have to be some severe changes and from almost everyone. And people don't want to know that. They don't want to hear about that. And that's why we need to talk about it. So, okay. So
I do want to add real quick there a couple things. One, what you'll notice through this podcast and future ones, Tony and I aren't always on the same page. In fact, we have fun diametrical political discussions. So this isn't about politics. In terms of the spending spree, I think objectively we can point to both parties. We can point to multiple administrations of both parties. So we don't want people to think, oh, we're blaming one side or another. There is a problem that objectively you can see with the amount of debt and what's happened to interest rates and inflation over the last 15 years. I think one more thing to add to it, I'll give real concrete examples in the industry I was in, or still am in tech primarily. We had a decade of offering free products, being able to subsidize prices. For example, Uber, the pricing of Uber now significantly higher than 2015 because investors were flush with cash and were able to subsidize lower prices to capture market share. The Instacarts, many of the DTC direct-to-consumer brands that came out the last decade, in the tech world, we jokingly refer to as ZIRP, Z-I-R-P, zero interest rate phenomena, which were companies that in a normal environment either wouldn't have gotten funded or would not have had the ability to capture market share because there would have been real cost to what they produced. And now we're seeing the destructive forces of that with companies going under or those who went public in 2020, 2021 being at 10% of the stock prices they were at just 2 years ago. And I've been involved with many of these companies in my professional life. I've seen it on the inside. Companies that shouldn't have gotten funding did. So those are the real life examples of what happens in a zero interest rate environment. You have companies funded, you're able to subsidize losses for years upon years, and 99% of them will not produce value to employees, to shareholders, to customers. And today we're really seeing that.
On top of the fact that the rates were negative or near negative during that period Ishmael just brought up, the Fed increased its balance sheet. And again, when the Fed will buy $1 billion of bonds, the counter trade is $1 billion that never existed. They write $1 billion, it's a number entry, a computer entry on the screen of a Federal Reserve Bank, but it's money that never existed. They took their Federal Reserve balance sheet from a level of 500 to 600 billion, right around the time Ben Bernanke showed up, to a level of 9 trillion about a year ago. Now they've brought it back down to a few dollars short of 8 trillion. I think the latest count was 792 billion. Or it could have been 749 billion. I don't have it right in front of me. It's a little bit shy of 8 trillion. I'm sorry. When I grew up, billions were a lot.
Billion.
But now what's a billion if it's a trillion, right? It's so they were expanding money in the system at the same time. And Mr. Bernanke was a very clever actor. He figured a way that the Fed could become more dominant and the government more powerful in the financial system. So he actually set up Federal Reserve accounts that paid these banks on this newly created money a little tad more than they could get anywhere else. So guess what? So they kept the money with the bank. So you didn't have the normal expansion that you would have had in society, but the money was still printed and it's been there. And you're right now, the money is a little tighter than it has been this century, because you've had the Fed allowing bonds to come due and being paid off and not buying more bonds to put more money in. So most of the raisings that have occurred, and you've seen the debt go from 31 trillion. We showed you the debt clock last week. We won't bring it in this week. We've got our Halloween to look at. And most of the increase, that rapid increase in the debt level, is not really showing you the increase in the interest paid. Because when you add the 7.8 trillion this year, that's going to be a 5% plus. Okay. And then are we going to spend more than we have? We have every year this century. All right. How much more? 2 trillion, maybe, with the war. All right. You add 2 trillion to that, call it 9.8 trillion at 5 point some percent. Then calculate that against the balance at 2.92. And that number I threw out, 3% on the interest to pay on our national debt, is not that far away. Certainly not as far away as some of the government agencies are predicting. They're predicting it not to occur to 2030 plus. And 3% on 30 some trillion, to me, is a trillion in interest. And that is astronomically higher than the 640 billion we spent in 2022. So the interest is going to eat us by the tailbone, so to speak. People need to be aware of this. They need to understand it. Politicians aren't talking about the detail of it. You need to know. It's your money, for God's sakes. It's the same kind of money that you balance your checkbook with every week. The morons on the Hill don't seem to care about it. If they did, they would be. Some of them are starting to care a little bit. But okay, let's move on, because we're talking about possibly the most important topic we're going to discuss this year and even next year. We're going to talk about the American family.
And I think this topic is absolutely critical in terms of not only a functioning society, but thinking about it from an investment perspective, thinking about how markets actually work. And for those who look into the family structure, 2-parent homes do better. Men who are married have significantly better outcomes than men who are not married. Children do better in 2-parent homes. Communities with married families tend to do better. Those are just objective facts. It doesn't matter if you're on the left or the right, or wherever. We have a fundamental understanding that families have better outcomes across the board for the spouses, for the children, for communities.
Now Ishmael sent me an article that showed right before we went live that showed how poverty among children had been reduced. Who was the author of that article? It was Gene.
I'm going to pull that article up again that I sent you here. And this has to do with the child tax credit of 2021, which was prepaid and part of the American Rescue Plan that came about. And one of the things was this was very interesting.
Elsie Gold. Yeah.
Yep. Elsie Gold.
Yep. I want to bring up her very source goes right into what I wanted to discuss tonight. She starts out in her first sentence citing the Census Bureau. Now, the Census Bureau compiles all these statistics, including the statistics of who's poor and who isn't. Now, but here are some facts you might want to know about the Census Bureau. In 2018, federal, state, and local governments distributed 2.8 trillion, okay, 22% of household income was distributed from entitlement programs, okay? And that includes everything from SNAP on down the line, every program you can think of. The government admits to having 80 programs. However, in his book, Myth of American Equality, Graham, Eklund, and Early say there are over 100 programs. We pretty much went with government statistics to talk about the family. The interesting thing is, Census Bureau does not count that 2.8 trillion when they calculate the recipient's income. In other words, they leave out the fact that they got 2.8. They only count 0.9 trillion. You wonder why. I think I might be able to suggest a reason that basically shows them significantly poorer than they actually were. This money is not taxed largely. Okay, it's not like Social Security. It's grant money. It's entitlement money. SNAP stamps, SNAP food stamps can go up to $900 a household a month. It's not a taxable amount of money. So basically, they're not showing you who they determine to be the poor, and there's a number of poverty level in America who they determine the poor. They determine the poor to have a lot less money than they actually do, because they're not counting the total money they're giving them. And then to make it worse yet, when you go to the 4.4 trillion that we spend in state, federal, and local taxes that we actually spent, let's use the same in the same year, 2018, they're not taking that off the money to compare everybody else to. So they're not subtracting the taxes from us, and they're not adding the entitlement benefits to who they call the poor. So in his Myth of American Inequality, Graham, Eklund, and Early did that work. And it's really a good book. And I've just read excerpts of it, but I'm actually couldn't get the book today. I'm going to get it, but the excerpts are what I'm talking from right now. Would show that they've practically eradicated poverty. It's down below 3%. You know, there's been, when you add up, then the question becomes, why would Census Bureau not want to show that? Well, you know, I mentioned last week that the government had grown to over 40% of the economy. We never in our lives have had a government this large. It started with Trump, and it's gone with Biden in spades for 3 more years. And I suggested last week too that they're no longer purveyors of perfectly accurate information. And why would they be? Because their interests may not be the same as ours in every instance. And that's, you can underscore that with this. If in fact poverty were cured by the current level of entitlements, okay, then basically, why are they even working? Why do they even have jobs? If you don't have a poverty group or an advocate to advocate for, you're really out of work. If you're a bureaucrat, or if you're a liberal politician, you can't turn to a distress group and talk about it if in fact they're no longer stressed. Now, it's a little tricky to present it that way, but if you consider it in context, that you take the bottom 3 quintiles of the economic ladder, 60% of all Americans are probably near the same in income, and it has gone down, but it's all above poverty. Okay. And that's my read of the thing. But the troubling thing for me is we're trying to stay honest in this, and we need honest agencies reporting honest numbers. And again, Census has been reporting the wrong numbers for apparently 75 years. They're self-serving numbers, but they're not the truth. So we need Census to report truthful numbers, so you can have people like Elsie Gould write her articles and base them on census data. If you don't have truthful numbers, then it doesn't matter. It really doesn't matter. And we're in a position where you have to be skeptical about what you hear from government agencies, and there's a lot of sources to get information from, but you just have to have some norm. You can't have that traditional acceptance. And we've so many people today, and this gets to the root of the change of the American family are reliant on government. I mean, you're talking the bottom two quintiles, 40% of the population. We never had a world where 40% of the population were reliant. Well, that makes a person look toward them much differently than if they weren't reliant on government. Okay. And by that, I mean, you're dependent on government. So many of the traditional things, duties and responsibilities we held ourselves and we made decisions on. And they've migrated now to government, and government makes a large, not maybe all the decision, but a large part of the decision. Now, we've also lost the freedom that went with that decision. But that's not as readily seen or as easy to see. But over time, it becomes apparent, because people that are totally government dependent, that are receiving entitlements, in my opinion, aren't in a good spot. We don't want them to be there. We'd like them to be out productive, doing some job and earning some money and feeling a reward from their productive effort. And you don't feel that when you're in government, in the government entitlement world. And you can get into it. You just have to make less than $18,000 a year, a family of four, less than $39,000 a year, and you can get into that world right away. And it's available not only federally with SNAP, it's available on the state level and the local level. But the byproduct of that dependence, that loss of freedom, if you will, is having an effect on the younger generation, and it's not good. And by younger generation, when you're an old guy like me, you can talk about 50 and younger, 40 and younger. Ishmael can't make that reference, but it's having an effect all the way down. I mean, today, statistically, single parent families, there are 25 million children in America being raised by single parent families. On the government's own statistics, 33% of every family in the government statistics. I can give you other statistics that suggest it's as high as the mid-40s of every family in America. The government statistic says it's 57% Afro-American. I can show you other statistics that say it's 76% Afro-American. The government's statistics have it at 37% Hispanic and 25% white. I can show you other statistics that it's near to 31% white and it's near to 56% Hispanic. But the point is, it's a huge segment of our young population is in a single parent environment, not in a traditional two-parent environment. And there are a number of tests that are showing a lot of weakness from that environment to raise a child compared to a two-parent environment, the traditional two-parent environment. There are a number of studies and tests that show those children do more poorly academically. They're more susceptible to mental illness. They're definitely more apparent in the judicial system. There's a strong correlation between absentee fathers and violence. And there's a strong correlation between absentee fathers and drug use. Not by any means that other groups don't have drug use, but statistically, there's an awful lot of it in absentee parents. So there's a whole secondary level of expense that's aside from these 80, 100 entitlement programs that are funding these numbers that we're getting excited about. That are not counted, that affect the medical area, that affect the criminal area, that affect just about every form of life you can think of, and mostly the lost opportunities. Because if there's any investment we're going to make, it should be in the younger generation. And if we fail to invest in our younger generation, how can we expect them to continue the productivity nationally we're going to need? Of course, you can always say, well, we'll have artificial intelligence to do it all by then. And we very well may. But right now, the investment in human capital in our younger generation is failing dramatically. And it's not due to a lack of investment. It's not due to less money being invested. And I would suggest that it's due to the single parent environment, or the environment that's raising children absent both parents. I mean, there are a number of studies that show brain activity in infants that are raised outside of a two-parent family is almost nil. There's no frontal lobe activity, especially if they're raised in adoption settings. And I'm talking about the first year of life. So they're
which
profound.
We've also seen as absolutely critical to long-term outcomes is that, first year of life in particular.
Sure.
And again, having been through it with my own young children and what they went through, and speaking with neurologists, just the importance of that and simple things that are unavailable, just the extra amount of love and attention when you do not have those households. And again, this is just objective fact. There's nothing that is biased about, hey, children with two parents do better. So I think one thing that we haven't touched on, again, you mentioned the 2021 experiment, which to me, again, from my perspective, my own perspective was terrific as someone who was a parent at the time, and having that, allowing us to invest into children. And, it went away after, and we saw what happened to childhood poverty there. But my question then is thinking about it from a standpoint of what do we do about it? What is the solution? How do investors think about this? How do we as taxpayers think about this, where we encourage these families and be able to invest into young and into children versus, today we frankly spend on the old and folks in your generation much more than we do on young children. What are some solutions you think we need to start?
Well, it's not the money. It's not the money. I was in a school with a dirt floor in Tanzania with 50 students aged 9 through 11. Everyone was wearing a blue shorts and a white shirt, or a blue skirt and a white shirt. Like I said, half of them didn't even have shoes. Sitting at attention with one woman, smaller woman in the front, that completely controlled the classroom. Speaking in English, doing mathematics. I mean, not anyone in Baltimore City passed the math equivalency exam this year. Not even one student in the whole city of Baltimore passed the math equivalency exam. I don't know. They might be in a race with the District of Columbia to see who hits the bottom first. They're not states, but they're spending a ton of money, and they're nothing more than elaborate babysitting systems. They're not helping these kids. The international PISA test confirms all this. We've sunk down. The latest test is only 2018. We're waiting on the 2020. Excuse me, I say 2020. There should be one coming out in 2020 from 2022 that should be coming out at any time. We sunk to 37th in the world in math. We're the second most, the highest spender on K through 12 in the world. And we're 37th in math. We used to be peerless last century. So it's not the money. We're the second biggest spender. We can get in another time exactly what it might be in the school system. To me, it's the loss of the parent as teacher. The teachers today aren't the parents they used to be, like this woman was in Tanzania. She stood up and everybody shut their mouth. She wrote on the blackboard and everybody paid attention. The teachers today are not that way, and they're not taught to be that way. Matter of fact, my daughter teaches, and she was forced to turn in a kid because to have a kid talk to higher ups over a fact that he had been spanked by his father, and they went to visit his father. There were no bruises or scars as a result of it, but that certainly isn't the job traditionally of a teacher K through 12 in America. And they're not so it's not the money. But unless we get back to doing the things we had done years ago, the things that I saw occurring in Tanzania in education. Now, the main thing to get back on to this talk about the family is we have put an article up on the site. In the article, we suggest that there ought to be penalties for males that create children and aren't responsible for that child. There ought to be penalties, including prison, and they must be responsible and pay for the child they created. We need to get back to that kind of a world. Today, it's just too easy for women to have children and plug into the entitlement factory and move on ahead, and too easy for males to move on and do whatever they're doing and not be responsible. We have to use the law to encourage these males to do the right thing, and that is to stand by that kid they created, and that would be one huge change. We're not here to solve all the problems. We can tell you, though, you can name the country in the world, and there's no one, not Russia. Russia has 18% single parent families. Not the Chinese have 3%, the Indians 5%, the Iranians 7.2%. We're in a world of our own in the 30s and 40% with single parent families, and with the government accommodating the responsibilities really very feebly, not doing a good job of it. Not when you consider all these deviant behaviors and the fact that these kids are doing so poorly in academics and in their futures. They show no real incentive in life. The one thing a mom and a dad will do, it will get that kid on chorus, and that kid will have a positive drive. You don't see that in where they're absent, and where a family's absent. So basically, that's our topic this week. It's these huge changes in the family, and not for the better, and a hope that we could start to get back to a more sane environment with families, and a suggestion that a step in that direction might be to actually criminalize the behavior of a man who has a baby and leaves that baby. That baby is his creation. He has a responsibility to stay with that woman, or to provide for that kid if they don't stay together for the rest of that, till that kid reaches full maturity. May not even be 18, might be up to 21, 22. If it's a college-bound kid, that dad's responsible. And that would be a step in the right direction, and a start to reintroducing the dad back into the family. And you can't really go from where we are today back to the way it was. But the statistics in 65 were 5% for whites, and Afro-Americans were 15% single parent. Like I said, some of the numbers today for Afro-Americans are up above 70%. You wonder how all these black ministers can only talk about getting gifts from government and can't talk about the destruction in their families. I mean, to me, that would be, if I were a minister, particularly a black minister, I'd certainly be harping on what's happened in the black family. So it's a very active topic. It's something essential for the future of America. If we don't invest in our young, we're not gonna have much of a future. Okay, and investments, we're not talking about money investments. We're talking about emotions and time. We're talking about parenting, and you need to invest in them. And if you miss that opportunity, Dad, you know, there are many consequences that can occur as a result. Anyway, I guess that's about it for our podcast tonight. We want everyone to have a great Halloween. We hope to get this to a point where we're going to go live regularly at a certain time of week. We're not there yet. We're going to have to post this up for your view. We appreciate your time. We hope you got something out of this, and we look forward to seeing you next time. Right, Ishmael? Anything to say?
Thank you very much. And again, as Tony said last week, back check this, put in the comments. This is a two-way discussion. So, if there's something that you heard, you disagree with, or you found something different, please identify it. And again, we'll get to a point where we'll be able to bring up questions and answer questions and say, hey, so-and-so person mentioned this about this topic. Why don't we dig into it a bit more? This is always meant to make folks think and be a two-way discussion. So please feel free to add any comments to this, any sources, any disagreements. That's where we'll get that vigorous discussion again, a bit of which we've lost the last few years.
We're not perfect, and we're striving to present you with the truth. We're doing the best job we can. We wish you to have a blessed week and a happy Halloween.
Thank you, everyone.